Hi, I'm Adam Lane Smith, an attachment specialist, and today I'm going to talk to you about why combat veterans have such a hard time connecting with their families when they come back, and what to do about it, and how to fix it. To understand this talk, you're going to need to understand two different hormones. Number one is oxytocin, and number two is vasopressin. If you've watched some of my previous videos, you understand what these are about, but I'll give you a brief, quick summary right here. Oxytocin connects you to other people during times of comfort, security, safety. When you feel close to somebody, when you're holding their hand, when you're talking quietly with them, when you're snuggling with them and sharing a blanket, you get oxytocin bonds during those quiet times. You get vasopressin bonds during times of friction, during times of stress, during times of trials, solving problems together, good stress and bad stress. Vasopressin bonds you during stress. Now, combat veterans, as shown in just about every bit of research and every war movie you can imagine, combat veterans tend to bond with the people in their groups. People in their squad, the people in their platoon, whatever it might be, they bond. They bond very closely because they've solved problems together. They've been stressed together. They've had to rely on each other for survival. That stress bonding creates immense vasopressin bonds, which are much more intense, let's say, in men. Men seem to have much more vasopressin and vasopressin receptors throughout their systems than women do. Men are more likely naturally to vasopressin bond. When men undergo trauma, when everybody undergoes trauma, their brain tends to skew so that they increase vasopressin and decrease some of that oxytocin bonding. You are more likely to bond through vasopressin and less likely to bond through oxytocin. It changes your brain. This is why those men and women in combat situations or in dangerous situations tend to bond so tightly and then continue to bond even more tightly, is because your brain favors that vasopressin bonding after trauma, especially after PTSD with severe trauma. That is why it is so hard for combat veterans who come home to a quiet, relatively peaceful setting where everyone else around them is vasopressin bonding through small little stresses, but mostly are oxytocin bonding through comfort. Your brain has been changed to bond through larger doses of vasopressin, and it raises that threshold so that you'll bond through larger stressors instead of smaller stressors. This is why so many combat veterans with severe trauma sometimes will look down on civilians and will say, none of you understand how hard it is. You've never been where I've been. You can't even imagine what it's like. I could never trust any of you because you're soft and weak. I've treated a lot of those individuals, and unfortunately, I've treated a lot of them in the correctional facilities where I've worked. I've treated them in jail. I've treated them when they are facing charges because they're unable to control some of their PTSD symptoms that lead them in pretty dark places. That is why that happens, is because your brain shifts its vasopressin bonding. That's one major reason. You're going to have a hard time connecting with your family who's never been away to war. Because your son hasn't picked up a gun and charged up a hill at your side, you're going to have a hard time connecting to him, most likely. Sometimes they call coming home to family the theater that they don't prepare you for. I've heard that called that before. They don't prepare you. You don't have courses that you take. They don't give you a month of exit of here's what's going to be like. Here's how to connect to your family. They don't teach you. They just dump you back out and say, all right, have a good life. Try not to kill yourself. The suicide rates are astronomical, and that's partly because veterans come back and don't know how to connect to anyone. And that's a lot of it to do with vasopressin shift. Your brain has shifted the way it connects to people. It's increased the threshold. Now, does this mean you have to go back to war and only can be friends with people in war? No, absolutely not. Although a lot of veterans, we're finding, they form those bonds, those vasopressin bonds, and then they struggle. And they actually find that during those circumstances, when they go back to those war settings, their anxiety decreases because they're vasopressin bonding with people and feeling safer there. So why a lot of Vietnam veterans, for example, just wanted to get back to Vietnam. They came home and didn't feel like they had a place here, so they wanted to go back to Vietnam. But Vietnam had changed too, and the war had ended. So they had nowhere to go. So many of them committed suicide or lost themselves through drugs. It's terrible. It's also fixable. So vasopressin bonds happen during times of stress. And if your threshold is increased, you need to increase that stress threshold a little bit. Does this mean you need to take your kid into the heart of downtown Chicago with a gun and say, all right, we're going to fight our way out? Probably not. But this does mean that your oxytocin bonding is going to be weaker, at least to start. The research shows that you can actually change the brain. It is malleable. You can shift it back over time. As you introduce more vasopressin bonding at smaller levels and more oxytocin bonding, your brain will shift itself back, is what the research seems to indicate. You can do that. You're not stuck forever. Healing your trauma is a big help. Healing any attachment issues you've had in the past will be a big help. Those will remove the obstacles. What you need to do, though, is create slightly stressful situations where you can bond together. So going on adventures together, camping together, renting an Airbnb with a big giant fireplace, and you as a family camp out in the living room, and you swear you are going to keep that fireplace lit for every single second you're there. Going camping in the woods together. Going camping one-on-one, you and one of your children, you and your spouse. Maybe you're married and you have struggled to reconnect in that marriage because your spouse doesn't know what it's like to be gone away at war and experience what you've experienced, and you're struggling to feel connected to them, and you want to, but you can't figure out why you aren't feeling close and why it doesn't feel comfortable to hold hands. The research shows that the more vasopressin bonding you do and more intense that it is, sometimes you become anxious during times of oxytocin bonding. Sometimes you become jealous of it and really possessive of it. Sometimes it makes you anxious and you want to run away from oxytocin bonding. That can happen. What you need to do is build small adventures in your day and your life with your family. Take your family to the gun range. Teach your kids how to use guns. If you're a veteran, do that. Go to the gun range, teach your kid how to use a rifle. And you can say, this is what I had to carry. That's a good time to bond. Go camping. Go driving. Do bumper cars. Good stress. Good stress. Competitive games where you can control your competitive drive and you're not going to be, completely crushing your family and laughing in their face. Don't do that. But competitive fun games. Cooperative games that are a little bit stressful. Paintball. Throwing a football back and forth. Sports. Anything that introduces a little bit of stress, a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of friction, and solves problems together. Solve problems together with your family members that you want to connect to. And you will start to feel better. You'll start to bond. You'll start to vasopressin bond at a lower threshold, but more often. So your brain will start to shift and say, okay, maybe I don't need the extreme threshold anymore. And then you'll start to oxytocin bond a little bit more and more. Understand that you may feel uncomfortable or nervous about it or even possessive of it at first. Then you will start to feel oxytocin bonding. Once you have vasopressin bonded to your wife multiple times, then you will start to feel closer when you hold hands. Then you'll start to want to hold hands. Then you'll start to want to feel more relaxed in their presence. That's how you do it. You don't come home from war and immediately feel, hey, life is great because I'm holding my wife's hand, typically. You come home and you have to ease back into that relationship with solving problems together. Solving problems together on purpose with a little bit of stress and bonding through those problem solvings. And then say, okay, I can trust my wife because we're solving problems together. Now I feel good enough to sit and really hold her hand. We can sit under a blanket and watch some TV. Now I feel a little bit better. I'm going to be bonding to her during that process instead of thinking how dumb it is. That is how veterans with trauma can come back and reconnect on purpose. That should decrease that threshold for suicide. That should decrease the likelihood of depression. It should decrease the anxiety, and it should ease them back into civilization. That's how you do it. And I wish they taught this in military when you were going home. When you're in jail, when you're in prison, they tend to, some prisons, give you a packet about what does it mean you're going home? What should you start thinking about? Sometimes they'll start working with you. Some prisons will start working with you on reintegrating back into society. I wish they did more of this in the military because we might not see the suicide rate that we see now. But this right here is a big piece of that answer. It's learning about vasopressin bonding, how you will not feel the same at first when you get out because you are not surviving with your family day to day based on how you all are holding on by the skin of your teeth together. You're not going to bond to them the same at first. You have to cultivate those bonds step by step by step, lowering the vasopressin threshold with more and more vasopressin bonding through solving problems and through slight stress, and then easing back into those oxytocin bonds. If you can do that, you should be able to reconnect to the people that you once felt close to. You might even feel closer to them than you ever did before. I'm Adam Lane Smith. I'm an attachment specialist. If you have any questions about this, or if you yourself are a veteran who has struggled to reconnect with your family, please leave some comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.